We all have our favorite toys when it comes to recording and mixing. A preferred guitar or amp, a go-to mic, etc. The same can hold true when it comes to effects. There may be a certain doubling effect that seems to work well on so many tracks, or a can't-miss compressor that always adds just the right amount of squash. EQ is no exception. We've probably found certain settings, especially certain frequencies, that always manage to provide just the right amount of thump or presence, and we end up using them over and over on a lot of different tracks. After all, since every instrument has its own distinct tone, the result should be different enough each time, right? Well, not necessarily. That may be true if you consider a bunch of sounds or instruments separately, but when you start mixing things together, then you do have to watch out. For example, a popular EQ choice is to add a little presence with a gentle rise, a broad boost of a dB or 3, centered around 5 kHz or so. This never fails to subtly lift many different tracks out of the mix, from vocals to piano to all sorts of guitars. But if you apply these old reliable settings too often to too many tracks in the same mix, you'll end up with a buildup of energy at the same frequencies that you're using over and over, and that may turn out to be problematic. Naturally, you won't notice it as you're working on individual tracks, or even maybe auditioning smaller subgroups of tracks, like all the vocals or all the guitars. But when everything is brought up, if there are a lot of accumulated boosts or cuts in the same range repeatedly, the mix may take on a bit of an edge at those frequencies. It may be obvious, or it may be more subliminal, subconsciously inducing a bit of listening fatigue. Either way, you end up realizing that the mix would be better if it didn't sound quite so EQ'd. The way to avoid this is to spread out the center frequencies of the EQ you're using on various tracks, especially if you're going for the same effect, like a little added presence. For example, let's say you need to gently lift a couple of vocals and maybe a guitar or two out of the mix without bringing up their mix levels, which sound fine as is. Instead of applying your favorite presence boost setting of, say, plus 2 dB at 5 kHz, you could try that on just one, maybe lead vocal track, and a similar boost at a nearby frequency for the guitars, maybe plus 2 or 3 dB at 3 kHz on one electric guitar, with plus 1 or 2 dB at around 6 to 8K on another acoustic guitar. And then maybe a broad plus 1 dB shelf around 8K on the backing vocals. You could even add slight dips, maybe a dB, at the frequencies used on other tracks, like a dip on the backing tracks at the same 5K that you'd boosted on the lead vocal, or a 3K dip on the acoustic guitar and a 6K dip on the electric, reversing the frequencies you'd boosted on those respective tracks. This can help carve out a little sonic space for each instrument. If they're heard alone, they still all have a little presence added, but it has a slightly different tonal quality with each track, so when they're heard together, they complement each other tonally, and they all cut through the mix effectively without too much buildup at any one specific frequency. Now, you don't have to go overboard with this, trying too hard to avoid reusing the same frequencies. But if you do perceive a problematic tonal edge in an otherwise well-balanced mix, it can be a good way to approach smoothing out the overall tonality without unneeded level changes or more drastic re-EQing that can end up turning an almost finished song into a remix.